Rebel groups and insurrectionist movements. They're a wonderful setting for a tabletop RPG campaign, especially if you're wanting to build on a mystery or even just make a good old conspiracy for the players to hunt down. Today we're going to be talking about how you, as a dungeon master, can build your very own Rebel Alliance from Star Wars. And we're going to be using the Rebel Alliance themselves as an example of something that you could build and a really good example of how to actually create a really cool, fun conspiracy to root out. Also, I've been watching way too much Andor, so there you go. I want to just talk about the Rebel Alliance for a little bit. So here we go. Welcome to my presentation, How to Make Your Own Rebel Alliance by me, the Extragalactic Unicorn. I really have been enjoying Andor, by the way. So in this tabletop RPG setting, who are the players? I always start with who am I designing for and who are going to be the players in this scenario. And in this scenario, we can have a couple of different possibilities. The first one is that they're going to be part of the Imperial faction. They're going to be Imperial officers or bounty hunters or Sith Inquisitors, you name it. And they're going to have the task of hunting down this rebel group that we're going to build. Or potentially, they could also be playing the rebels, and you need to build some sort of conspiracy network for them to interact with, them to get their missions from. So what game are we playing? Well, in this particular scenario, we are going to be using a made-up planet called the planet of Taurus. It's just a made-up planet that I have made. If it does exist in Star Wars canon, I'm really sorry, I'm not talking about that. I am instead talking about this particular planet that I have envisaged. Taurus is a desert planet with an Imperial garrison, and the Empire is trying to tighten their control because it just so happens to have a really rich plasticrete deposit on this particular planet, and that's ideal for creating small arms and armor within the Star Wars universe. So, how does Taurus work? Basically, when I started to think about this, how this campaign would work, the first thing that I did is I went and built out how the city or how the planet of Taurus actually functions. This is effectively a brief diagram of all of the different imperial and also planetary structures which make up this particular faction. Right at the top, you can see that there is like a sector moth. When in Star Wars, the Empire tend to use moths as their sort of main governance for a particular sector. And under him is an Imperial governor who is effectively running the planet. He is doing the day-to-day political jobs of actually enforcing Imperial rule on Taurus. And under him is a number of different factions which are ultimately, trying to maintain their order and also trying to do their own jobs. You have, of course, a Stormtrooper battalion who's got a Stormtrooper leader commander, basically, who is basically providing the tactical support for the Imperial governance on this planet. You have an ISB intelligence officer. He's basically being the spy master. And you also have the old Imperial army commander as well. And I also have on the other side of things the general civilian industry of the planet and the civilian bureaucracy. Because at the end of the day, when the Empire kind of comes into a place, they can't just take it over and that's that. There is a initial transition period going from, a planetary rule to imperial rule. So a lot of this existing bureaucracy will exist, and it still exists, even if it is subservient to the imperial bureaucracy. It is a remnant of the old republic, and that is something which will probably end up giving the rebels a little bit of breathing room, but unfortunately as well, it still exists for the Imperials and they have to deal with it. So there is ultimately a senator in the Imperial Senate, and there is also a old planetary governor who is maintaining the old civilian bureaucracy. One of the really interesting things we do end up seeing in Andor is the Imperial Bureau of Standards, and Yes, I know, a logistics bureau is incredibly non-exciting, but trust me, it's exciting because this effectively means that the Empire is trying to standardize a lot of their weights and measures throughout the galaxy. We can assume that during the time of the Republic, individual planets had their own individual bureaucracies and systems for dealing with let's just say something like the Bureau of Food Standards, for example, right? Like, in the modern world, for example, food standards over in the UK and the US and in Europe are all completely different. And there are different bodies which are ultimately managing each of these individual food standards. However, in the imperial context, there is a planetary governance of food standards, but there is also an imperial one. And the empire can't just replace the entire bureaucracy of this food standards because of political reasons, so they will have to have a body above it who actually manages the imperial standards, and will ultimately end up transforming that civilian bureaucracy into something a little bit more along the lines of what Emperor Palpatine wants. And during the time of the Old Republic, individual planets had their own independent militaries. These later got subsumed into the Imperial Army, which means that the Imperial Army Command Chief has a bit of a split loyalty thing going on. Whereas before he was a planetary defense force commander, he is now part of the Imperial military and has Imperial orders. Furthermore, I have completely separated the Imperial fleet from this particular scenario, because the Imperial fleet are going to be an empire-wide institution. Really, you don't want planetary governors having fleets, because it means that they can take their planetary defense force and then they can move it off planet, and then suddenly you've gone from a single planet who may possibly be in rebellion to some potential military clique scenario going on. So you don't really want that. Instead, what I have drafted up is that the Imperial Navy is under the control of the Imperial Sector Moth. Funnily enough, if you read Legends canon, you do actually end up having a couple of military cliques which are formed in the wake of the Empire, purely because Sector Moths are actually the ones in charge of the Imperial Navy, and therefore they're the ones who can control a large sector. So you do kind of get that problem, but like at least not on the local level. And that's really where the Imperials have a bit of a problem, because with the Emperor, all of the Sectomorphs are loyal to the Empire at the very least. So anyway, the Imperial fleet does need to do some liaison with the planetary governance, so they will have a liaison who is stationed with the planetary governor. And he is the one that all Imperial Navy orders go through, and if the planetary governor needs some TIE fighters, or it needs a Star Destroyer, they're going to be the one that they call. The Star Destroyer themselves answers to an admiral, and the admiral then answers to the Sector Moth. So, what is the Empire's main goals on Taurus? Well, we can break these down into two distinct categories, and we'll do this for the Rebellion in a bit as well. Long term, they ultimately want to solidify their Imperial presence, and they also want to turn Taurus into a massive manufacturing hub for arms and armor. However, they can't just do that right away. Creating a friendly regime takes a lot of time. So in the short term, what they need to do is they need to pacify any current rebel activity to keep the Empire's image intact so that they can eventually solidify their presence. And they also want to, in the short term, just increase production so that they can actually support their war effort against the Rebel Alliance. So, who are the Rebel Alliance? Well, if you've watched Star Wars at all, then you will probably have images of the Alderani guardsmen over there. But ultimately, the Rebel Alliance is not just what you see in the movies. They are also, freedom fighters, and they come from a variety of backgrounds. You can also see I've chosen an image of Saw Gerrera's band from Rogue One, because they're not particularly nice people. And the Rebel Alliance is just that. It is a collection of not so nice people and well-meaning people who are trying to achieve a goal. And we can quite clearly see what that goal is if you read out the description of what the Rebel Alliance is from the Star Wars wiki. The Alliance is portrayed as a stateless coalition of rebel dissidents and defectors who oppose the Galactic Empire and its authoritarian rule. Its stated goal is to restore the governance of the previous Galactic Republic, which has been dissolved after its leader Palpatine seized absolute power and declared himself Emperor. So, how do the rebels work? Well, this is a bit more of a simple graph than before, and we'll get into that a little bit later. This is how the Rebel Alliance as a whole kind of works. Effectively, you have a centralized rebel command structure, and then you have individual rebel groups who have their own independent hierarchies. The Rebel Alliance is not so much a political entity as a mismatch or a collection of political entities. And there's a really good reason why they ultimately go down this route. First of all, a centralized command allows them to have galactic-wide coordination and coordinate all of their resistance efforts. It allows them to work together to achieve their stated goal of restoring the Old Republic. However, each of these leaders are going to have different ways and different thoughts about how you actually go about achieving that. So, in order to corral all of these people together, they have to allow these leaders to have a high degree of autonomy. However, this does give them a really good advantage because it allows reactive actions and sporadic resistance efforts to keep the Empire from concentrating their forces. It means that if you have a fire over here, you can't necessarily say that you also have a fire over there because you can't link the two together. Compartmentalization means that if one group completely falls, then the whole network is not exposed. There is an idea that there is somebody behind the scenes, pulling all of the strings, but if you don't know who it is, then it's impossible to stop all of these individual groups from, causing mayhem. Independent leaders are also fundamentally a political necessity for the Rebel Alliance. We have to remember their stated goal is they want to return to the idea of the Old Republic, and the Old Republic was a decentralized republic. They are not an authoritarian regime. They have no business telling whatever particular resistance group this is the way that it should be done. They want to make sure that they can cooperate together and work together, but they cannot actually tell individual leaders what they can and cannot do. They are not an organized military, they are a group of independent state actors, and they all have their own egos and their own ways about doing things. And if you piss one off, suddenly they're going to go off on their own, and then they're working on their own, and you're not going to be able to fight with them or coordinate with them or even get supplies from them. Because even if you have the same ideals, they're not going to like you. So they're not going to work with you. And as silly as it sounds, that's just going to be something that ends up happening. So what are the rebels' stated goals on Taurus? Well, again, we can break these down into long-term and short-term goals. Long-term, they want to liberate the planet from the Empire, and they also want to create a large armed insurrection movement so that they have, bodies to throw at the Empire, basically. But liberating an entire planet of a force which can absolutely stomp you if they really want to is very difficult. So they need a couple of short-term goals. Fundamentally, at a short term, they want to subvert the Imperial supplies and supply the wider alliance with arms and equipment. They're going to do a good old smuggling operation and take advantage of what the Empire is trying to do here. They also want to support other rebel initiatives because if the Empire really wants Taurus, they're gonna take it. There's probably not an awful lot a couple of bands of rebels can do. So at the most what they can do is they can wean off the supplies of the Empire and support initiatives elsewhere. So how do the Rebel Alliance work on the ground? How does this work on a local level? A conspiracy of any type must ultimately protect itself above anything else. And this goes for more than just the Rebel Alliance. It goes for any kind of conspiratorial mystery that you may want to run. If suddenly the powers that be realize that they have a conspiracy and they have traitors in their midst, they're going to do everything they can to weed it out. And you really want the element of surprise and secrecy when you're dealing with this, because if we take the Empire as a good example, if the Empire decides to turn up with an entire Stormtrooper Legion, there's not so much a couple of bands of rebels can do, except hide among the citizenry, and the Empire has already shown that they're more than happy to just, commit some war crimes. A conspiracy is also composed of individuals with limited communication. So there are going to be individual actors who have their own distinct egos, their own distinct personalities, ways of doing things, and they're not going to be able to talk to a lot of people, so they need to have a degree of autonomy. We also kind of need to focus on why these people are doing this as well. People don't decide to get up and just fight the authoritarian regime because at the end of the day, that's a dangerous thing to do. And as idealistic as it is to stick one to the man, I have a family to provide for. Actually, the Empire gave me a job, so why would I want to kick them off of the planet? They keep me employed, the good money's good, Also, I have dependents that I'm looking out for. Maybe I don't actually care about what the Empire's supposed atrocities are. They're the same as the Old Republic anyway, because it's the same suits, it's under a different label. And you can kind of understand why a lot of people just don't really care about maybe going and fighting for liberty or whatever. At the end of the day, we need to understand why the rebels are fighting here, and why is the Empire the bad guy? If the bad guy is supposedly paying your wages, giving you time off, giving you good rights and such, why would you grab a space AK and go and fight? Because why would you, So we need to understand what the rebels are actually fighting for and why these people are ultimately militants. It could be that the Empire has done something bad to them personally, so therefore they want a little bit of revenge. Or that they could be idealists, they could be zealots, they could be any kind of activist or other kind of person. These people are very special people at the end of the day, and you want to treat them as the individual personalities that they are. And how do they subvert the current system? Well, the problem with conspiracy and the problem with rebel groups is that they need to work within the current system to fundamentally subvert it to their whims. They need to talk to people and they need to interact with people that we saw on the other big flow diagram tree that I showed you, because those are the people who can get things moving for them. So here we have a nice little sample rebel group of the rebel group of Taurus. Right at the top, you have the Taurus resistance leader, who is going to be the big shot firebrand who decides, I am going to set up some sort of rebel group. And that guy you will really want to put a lot of characterization into. Scary word here. They're going to have their own ideology. I know, right? Very scary word. They're going to have their own ideology, which they're going to want to push. So they're going to have their own ideals, and you'll want to take a lot of time focusing on this character and understanding who they are, because once you understand who they are, you're gonna understand what this rebel group is going to ultimately try and accomplish and the main things that they are going to be focused on, because that is what that particular person is focused on. And of course, rebel groups don't come out from nowhere. They need funding. So what we also have is should we say, a willing investor in the rebel cause. A local business person who's decided that for some reason or the other, the Empire is not good for business, not good for him, so he is going to actually fund this whole initiative. At the end of the day, rebellions are expensive, so the funds are going to have to come from somewhere. Looking into how businesses actually do shady stuff is also a really good thing to think about when thinking about conspiracies, because you can't just make some payments from one particular company to another because some ISB clerk or whatever is going to go and say, well, that's kind of suspicious that you went and bought some load of rifles and suddenly we had a bunch of rebels running around with those particular brand of rifles. Can I see where those went? Are those in storage somewhere? So businesses will probably end up working through shell companies, and they're going to end up having a number of different companies which they're going to work through to obfuscate that, you know, little bit of loss of revenue which is going to the rebellion. You're also going to want to give them some genuine legal work. So for example here I've got a arms supplier who is genuinely supplying the rebellion, but also genuinely supplying the empire too, because why wouldn't they? They are an arms supplier and it looks suspicious if they're not. So they will have to have some sort of front end front for them to actually run their goods through. Over at the very end as well, I also have a good old rebel smuggling operation, which is the main thing that the rebels are doing because they're trying to smuggle arms and armor. There's also a local militia and even a local activists group who acts as a front runner for the rebellion and a front runner for people being able to join. They're the people who the Empire are going to be probably the most aware of, and you're going to have to think a lot about what those people are going to be doing and how they're going to hide the fact that they're recruiting people for the rebellion. A lot of these people are also agents and key go-betweens between independent people, because the main resistance leader talking to the main militia commander is going to look very suspicious. And also, if the main militia commander gets caught, then, well, he knows who the big head honcho is. So really you want somebody in between these people who can act as some sort of go-between so that you have a bit of plausible deniability for the people at the top. Because if the people at the top go away, then you're going to have a really hard time building up this network again. Because again, people who decide they're going to take on the Empire are few and far between, especially people who have the capability of forming a very competent conspiratorial rebel group. There are very few and far between, they're very special people, and as a rebel alliance, you do not want to lose them. So you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that their identity remains a secret, and that when your players are ultimately trying to pick apart the conspiracy, they're going to have a hard time getting to the very head of it. And why is it so complicated? Well, as I kind of mentioned, adding go-betweens adds layers of abstraction between key elements of the network. If one head honcho goes down, then the whole network is going to suffer massively. But if you lose a go-between or a messenger or a key agent, yes, that's still a big loss, but it's not the worst thing in the world. If a key individual is captured or killed, the whole network will ultimately suffer. And if you add in inefficiencies and multiple points of contact, it means their activities are much harder to track and much harder to find. But we haven't really talked about tabletop RPGs a lot, so why is it actually so complicated? Well, if you have go-betweens and individual separate agents, you neatly bookend part of the adventure where the players can suddenly find a key element of that network. It actually sets you up for neat chapters, and that is actually something that will allow you to pace your sessions much better. Key individuals can be worked up towards and discovered, which builds the mystery, builds the tension, and builds their idea and builds their picture of how this network works. If the conspiracy is hard to track, and you have tried to hide it efficiently, the players get to have the fun of uncovering a mystery, and if you're playing this kind of game, that's the thing that you want them to be doing. So how do our players who are playing some Imperial officers or Sith Inquisitors go and actually unpick our rebel alliance. Well, what you need to do is you need to create key events and plans which the rebels are enacting. Have those events play out in the world and allow the players to investigate them. Maybe our militia go and blow up some sort of power plant, and then that will give the players a reason to go and visit that power plant. Or you could have the rebel smugglers steal a particular box of arms and equipment, and then the players have something to go and hunt. But you're not trying to be perfect. You're not actually trying to win this as an engagement. You're trying to leave a trail which will lead your players to individual parts of this network, because the individual parts of that network are ultimately your chapter heads for your sessions, and you want your players to be able to discover one, then go to the other, then go to the next one, and slowly unpick this mystery web that you have weaved. You want to let your players follow the trail, and then you want to have a plan for what they do when they actually follow the trail, or what you do when they follow the trail. And you also have to figure out what you do when they decide they're gonna go off script. Because in a big old campaign like this, where you're trying to have a mystery with multiple moving parts, there's going to be things that your players throw at you, which you're not gonna think of. They're gonna lay their own traps, and they're gonna lay their own little mysteries. So how do you react to what the players are doing as the DM? The rebels are going to interact with the structure of the planet. They will try and eliminate key figures, destroy key infrastructure, and will react to what the players do when they start to get closer. They will not want these Imperial officers finding out what they're doing, so they will try to lash back. You have to be smart, and you have to have a plan. And then when the players throw a wrench into your plan, you change your plan. Each week, you should be re-evaluating the game and plan the next move that the antagonists are going to make. Even if the players don't see what you're doing, or if the rebels are moving off screen, they still need to be moving off screen, because that is something that the players will end up finding a little bit later. You need to make important figures and adversaries very memorable and give them key set pieces which will blow your players away. After all, when you go and find the big bad guy, you're going to want it to be memorable, right? But always remember, your players are not trained investigators. You can't afford to be perfect. You must let the rebels slip up, because if they don't, then you're playing against the players, and as a DM, you're not playing against your players. You're playing with them. You're trying to create a narrative, and a cooperative narrative, and the players should be able to go and find out what's happening. Each set piece that you have in mind needs to point in one or multiple directions, and you can entangle your plot so that the players have something to talk about. Always make sure to give a quest to one particular player, and then give another quest to another particular player, and then have both of the ends of those threads lead to the same place. Maybe your rebels are coordinating from a warehouse, and one player is going to investigate a murder, another player is going to investigate some stolen arms shipments. Both of them lead back to a rebel group who are in a warehouse. And then suddenly you have a bigger picture of what the rebels are actually doing. And it also means that your individual players can contribute to the mystery solving. You should also give your players a reason to care. In the Imperial planet of Taurus, what's to bet that some of the players are actually characters who are from Taurus itself? Maybe they are Imperial officers who are Imperial sympathizers, but maybe they know particular people from this planet. And if you give your players a reason to care, if you take some of the backstory that your players have written, and then maybe say they had some sort of antagonist or rival in mind. If you make that rival a part of your rebel network, suddenly you've got a player hooked because you are using what they have written, and you want to be doing a cooperative storytelling, you're not supposed to just be giving them a story to run with. If your players do give you pages of backstory, go and use it, go and integrate it into what you had in mind. Use what the players give you, because then they're going to be very invested in what is going to happen next. There we go. Thank you for listening to my wonderful talk on how to build your own Rebel Alliance. If you've enjoyed, please consider subscribing, because I am going to be talking a lot more like this about different aspects of tabletop RPG design, and if you found this video interesting or intriguing or helpful, then I'd very much appreciate if you leave a comment and say what you thought. Also, if you have any questions, I'm going to be checking the comments of the video, so feel free to put down a question and I will more than happily answer. Until then, thank you very much for listening or watching, depending on how you decided to watch this video. And thank you very much again. I will see you around. Cheerio!